That's the
I might
thing.
leave early just to go to my class. Don't take it as a reason.
Because you have to do yours.
Yes.
I guess I can
It's not
figure
because
it
it's boring, it's going to be really confusing.
out.
So Chad, we're good?
Yeah. Try and keep track of it.
No worries, but if any way I can help you.
Okay. So, you'll see I have a big mouthful of a title, what my inquiry was. So, introducing alternative perspectives of knowledge, I'll have to define that, in the science classroom to encourage universal acceptance of all human identities. Big block of words. So it was suggested by Dr. Delisle that I just maybe define a few things here right off the bat. So perspectives of knowledge in the science classroom. This is really just the different points of views that we can look at the various topics in high school sciences from grade 7 to grade 11. But there are multiple perspectives depending on which topic you're talking about that can be talked about amongst the teacher and the students. And when I'm saying with the universal acceptance of all human identities, universal acceptance, I'm talking about being welcoming and empathizing with all different human identities, which could be different ethnicities, different cultures, nationalities, even going to different genders, sexual orientation, and we can go on with this list. Right now you might be thinking, how does science connect with that? So that's one of the things I'll be talking about. Actually, I'm looking around, there's only one person I don't really know. So my name is Tchad. At McGill, when I first registered, it said middle name, so I put in my middle name, and now it follows me everywhere. At McGill, so there you go. So I thought, oh yeah, so because I'm unshaved, I thought I'd put a picture of myself unshaved. So I thought it was important to mention a bit about me so that you understand why I chose such a topic. Sort of a deeper topic. I hope I can be able to explain it and go into it well. So I went into the MATL. It wasn't a decision that I just on a whim. I went into the MATL after a lot of my friends had already made these decisions about their professions, and when I tossed away all the distractions in my life, I knew that teaching is really what I wanted to do, and I wanted to go into teaching to fulfill what I think is a fundamental role of being an adult, which is to provide guidance and support and security and happiness to children. That's why I'm here in this program. And one reason why that is one of my goals is because of the changing world that we're in right now, and it seems to be just accelerating at an exponential rate. The changes that are happening, especially on a social level, that we can see as close to home as here in Montreal, and we see it internationally. And we're seeing this coalescing, this grouping of all kinds of wonderfully different people in the world. We're working together, we're living together, coming from different backgrounds. But in saying this, it's undeniable that there are conflicts that exist when there are different points of views out there on how people can be in the world. And so I thought there's no better place to try and introduce the alternative perspectives of all kinds of different things, different perspectives of knowledge right there in the classroom, and more specifically in the secondary classrooms. And I'll tell you a bit why I think even the science classroom is a great place for that. And adolescents are at an age where they're just starting to be able to practice moral reasoning, abstract thinking, both necessary to jump out of their own shoes, a very difficult thing to do, and consider different perspectives. And so, similar to the title of my capstone, is my number one research question, which is how can high school science teachers introduce multiple perspectives of knowledge within subject matter with the goal of developing these empathetic and pluralistic students, so accepting the different cultures. It's a big endeavor. I've seen see where I went with it. And I had a few support questions to help me out. So what I ended up having to do to support my paper is to first look at how knowledge and perspectives were created in the first place. How was identity created? And then more I want to know, are there actual teaching techniques and perhaps pedagogical styles that high school science teachers can implement in their classrooms to not only introduce multiple perspectives, but to encourage that the understanding of different perspectives, so being empathetic towards the different human identities under the sun. Before I dive into it, I just want to quickly mention that having explained why I'm doing it, I just want to say that how this came to be in my mind is very much an inspiration from a class I had with Dr. Alison Gonzalez, which Rebecca's the only one who's the other student in the science stream, but I thought it was a wonderful class. That it was the first time in my life, I was 27 last year, that that class forced me to really deconstruct myself, my identity, and for the first time consider other people's perspectives. And we're all told that think about it from if you're in someone else's shoes, but we're still kind of doing that from our own backgrounds. It's a very difficult thing to do. And I can tell you, I told my students yesterday, I did this for the first time. I was 27 years old, and I never truly considered other points of view. It's very difficult to do. So, how the heck am I going to tackle this? I separated my literature review, and it's purely a literature review. I did that for my own learning. Separated into three distinct sections. So the first one I had mentioned, I want to identify identity and knowledge creation. I use constructivist, cognitivist, and identity theories to explore that specifically, and how high school, and then the second part of the literature review is how specifically high school sciences propagate dominant cultural views. Now, science is often viewed as very black and white, very objective, so you might be thinking, how the heck does science only push one point of view? Doesn't science only have one point of view? So that's something that has to be debunked a little bit today. And then the third part of my literature review is I actually want to go inside of, were there a few teachers who tried to implement this in their classrooms, and I was interested in different techniques to see if there was effective change, affective change in the students. So, part one, time. Before I go into it, because culture is such an important thing in identity creation, I just want to share with you guys a few things that were in my capstone that were very important to understand what culture is. I can tell you when I'm asking adults in my social surroundings, they can't define it very well. So here is one. It's the acquired knowledge people use to interpret experience, or a set of patterns experienced by individuals as normal ways of acting, feeling, and being. And that word normal, it's what's perceived as normal in their lives, dictated by the culture that surrounds them. And the way in which people understand ideas and ascribe meaning to everyday life. So culture is very much part of our identity, who we are. They're intricately linked and inseparable. So how do we shape our realities? I looked at, if you're in the education building right now, you know who Vygotsky is and the constructivist theories. I know you're familiar with him and the social development theory. Talk about the more knowledgeable other, which I thought was very much related to Bandura's behavioral learning theory. So here it says, children primarily learn through imitation of models in their social environment. Very much, children from a young age are building their identities, who they are, from their peers, from the children in the schoolyard, the culture in the elementary school, the teachers they're with, their parents. And nowadays, they get different models that come from all over the world, accessible through their phones. Now, in my classroom, my kids are, if I didn't make them put their phones away, their faces would be glued to them, and they're constantly getting this information, getting their own interpretations of what's right and wrong, what's normal, what they consider abnormal, where all these things are constructed. So the learner, the child, is a product of their environment. And as I just said, what they consider wrong, right or wrong, the normal, abnormal is whether even if they see something that they consider wrong, it's just how they've built their reality. So constructed. And then, this is a bit faster, but Yuri Brofenbrenner, the ecological model. His ecological model is also one that I used to like. He split it up into different layers that would influence a person in their development. And he left culture at the exterior. And then culture would influence this layer, institutions, and this layer, and then finally the microsystems, like only parents and peers, would then influence the individual. However, there are now alternative ecological models that where culture permeates every single social circle around the person. And like I said, culture and identity are very much intricately linked. And I thought, and I came across cognitive dissonance, and I thought it's important to mention here. Here it says concepts which challenge one's identity, which is preformed now, or understanding of social realities may cause affective or psychological discomfort. And resistance to accepting alternate concepts inconsistent with acquired beliefs or ideas is what is cognitive dissonance, first coined in 1957. So your mind will make an attempt to try and dismiss, these alternative ideas, and because it's attacking someone's identity and beliefs, and so new ideas will be dismissed. Interestingly, I saw a study by McFalls, Cobb Roberts here in 2001. They were sharing the nature of cognitive dissonance with their participants. I believe they were pre-service teachers before introducing dissonant cognitions, which are ideas that go against their own. And there is benefits in addressing, just simply being explicit with them and addressing them and teaching them about cognitive dissonance and how they might just go around it. So, in talking about that first, going into identity, it's sort of a leap now, but I want to just share a little bit about how does science education actually help me, dominant culture. I know I just shared this, but this was like how I opened that section in my capstone. But the belief that there are absolute facts creates the power for someone to say what the facts are. Speaking to a very objective image of what science is. But in fact, science is a very subjective thing, right? It's created by scientists who are coming from their own background, they have their own biases, right? And so science itself is created with very much like, the science that's taught here in Quebec is very North American, very Western style of science. There's a lot more to it than that. Curriculums are a product of government. They serve society, they serve economic purposes. However, students should be the creators of their own knowledge in the science classroom, tapping into their science capital to enable multicultural education. First of all, science capital is, students are coming into the science classroom, they've already made observations of the world, prior to walking in, and this is what teachers should be tapping into. There's science capital usually used to mean money, right? And then there's multicultural education. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later, but this of course is not just a day to bring in food. There's a lot more to it, but I'll go into it in a few minutes. Or right now? Excuse me. But I do mention a bit more later. So multicultural education involves developing a personal connection to scientific knowledge. I can't say that next word. So I actually invented a new word, it's demything. That's how I would practice it. So demything science, discovering the socially constructed nature of science, the subjectivity of it, and uncovering social injustices created by science and technology in order to be more socially conscious and able to take action to strive for a more equitable society. And you'll see I'll go into teaching techniques that actually take a political stance for certain issues that might pop up in science. And one of them here is gender stereotypes. So scientific knowledge is very much gendered. I thought it important to define what gender is, because when I talk to people about it, they have no idea outside of the bubble that we're all speaking in right now in this building. Gender is a response to an external event or a circumstance. It's a result of an interaction rather than being a set of internal characteristics. It's a situated response, to put it simply. I love this one. We're not born with gender, we do gender. It's an action. There's two main ways how I saw how science could be gendered. I know that there's the silent encouragement of the conformity of the lasting image of the white male scientist, which I find is changing today. However, there are still science fields like there's physics, there's different engineering fields that are very stereotypically masculine. So there are people who identify or are invested in identifying themselves as being more feminine, which they'll turn away from these fields themselves, even though there's already been an interest. Might be turned away sadly by peers or family members. Are you sure you want to go into something that is more for girls or is more for boys? We can flip it around as well. There are fields that are typically more feminine, and then someone who might identify as more masculine might avoid these fields even though there's an interest. And then just at the bottom here, so science curriculum, textbooks, materials, also propagates a gender binary. And often there's the superimposing of gender and genitals, right? Biological sex, which the two they're completely different. We know that gender is an action, it's a situated response. However, nothing is done in the science classroom to debunk that. Then there's heterosexism and heteronormativity. That's the perception that heterosexuality is the only normal and natural way of being in the world. And again, science does nothing to help this. Curriculum, teachers, pedagogy that they use are all ingredients in reproducing this idea without even knowing it. It's not knowingly done, or hopefully not. But still, these messages and heterosexism and heteronormativity continue. It's all constructed. It's all it is. It also depends on the culture you're in. Everything is like culturally mediated, but it's constructed. And science also really enjoys to compartmentalize everything. Right? Heterosexual, homosexual. This is the same article, 2009. Kristen Gunkel advocates for the dismantling of social construction of normativity. She calls this applying queer theory to science education. This was, of all the articles I've read in my time here at WTL, this particular article was my absolute favorite. Here is an image of father and mother, kind of stereotypical, and they have their hands not quite on their shoulders, but here's a family image. And then this other image, we have two men, they have a baby, and it might be on a poster outside, and it might just you're somewhere and you glance by and you see this image. And for a lot of people, they might hear this image and they might think, okay, it's two gay men and their baby, or it's two homosexual men and their baby. But in both instances of what I just told you, the homosexuality of the image sort of is blurted out. It's there, you see it, it's right in front of you. You can't. Most people will look at this photo and it's an invisible subtitle, we can say. But when I go back to this image, does it blur it out? Oh, look, a heterosexual couple. No, the heterosexuality is invisible. It's been so normalized, it's invisible. But the homosexuality in this photo is quite, most people will, it stands out. Right? And this is what Kristen Gunkel is trying to change here. And she argues that without addressing these issues and just avoiding them can have terrible consequences, and it doesn't solve anything. It's just as bad to avoid them, right? Ignoring these conversations, not adjusting the way the sciences are taught, goes against fulfilling the number one obligation to protect children in our custody at school. So you can have children that feel rejected, abnormal, unwanted in their classrooms, in their own homes, even by the society and culture that surrounds them. So this is something that can very much change, and science education can address these things. And last, I'm just going to glance over it real quick. But we've all heard of the antagonistic relationship between science and religion. Very common, often, so religion plays a crucial role in one's everyday life, very much like culture. And religion and culture are very much intricately linked. Permeates thinking, permeates the ideas that people have and their actions. It's a fundamental part of identity, much like culture. It's a basis for moral reasoning, and it guides decisions and interactions that people have. Science teachers shouldn't be focused on disproving anything in the classroom. Not to create these antagonistic relationships with their own students. And I would argue that there's not even a need to contradict both of them. I don't think that they do contradict, because they're not answering the same questions. Science being very much a history of observations and explanations of various processes and phenomena that transpire in the world, whereas religion being a personal relationship with God and creation of the world is an important moral dimension. Now this is a monotheistic, and I'm limiting myself with the way I describe it here. But I think that they're answering different questions. Now conflicts will arise when there's literal interpretations of scripture and misunderstandings of how scientific knowledge is created. I don't have the answers in my paper. I wanted to glance over a few issues in the science curriculum. However, I feel like these are conversations that should be had and not ignored in order for them in order for these issues to be resolved and to avoid any future conflict in the individuals. And so how am I on time, actually?
Got 10 minutes total.
Minutes, okay. So the third part, after looking at identity, cognitive dissonance, and how science can propagate certain dominant cultural ideas, I wanted to see, all right, how is this actually happening in the science classroom? Well, it turns out there's lots of studies on, gender science, and lots of studies on feminism in science, lots of studies for pre-service teachers and their effective changes when being shown different perspectives for the first time. Tons of those. Are there lots of studies on, empathy and changing of perspectives in students? Not so much. That was very, very difficult, and understandably, it's also something very difficult to measure, especially if you're conducting a study, and that change in that person might happen 10 years down the line. So, however, I did find a few things. Jack Mesereau's transformative learning theory provides a template. This was used for pre-service teachers. But it's for transforming a person's frame of reference, which is very much the filter in which ideas and concepts are coming into the mind and the way they're going to interpret. For that to be more adaptable, inclusive, and for these individuals to be more reflective of new concepts. And how this was done was first introducing a disorienting problem. So introducing a problem to the students. In this case, it was pre-service teachers. Now I call this I just noticed that in my capstone, I'm saying this is obviously the rate limiting step. If the dilemma or the issue that you're presenting is not relevant to your classroom, to the individual, nothing will go on past that. So this has to be a meaningful thing, so you have to get to know your students in order for this to work. And then there's critical reflection. There's a few key questions that could be asked for this, but it's about students taking time to self-reflect on their own decisions and where they're coming from with this disorienting dilemma. And then finally, there's a rational discourse step in the transformative learning theory where other opinions are shared. So getting as many opinions and points of view as possible within that classroom. Now, I thought this was limiting, this whole structure, and so I went further into my search. And then there was a few papers on socio-scientific issues, similar to like choosing a dilemma But it's often been advocated to use socio-scientific issues to teach science. And actually science curriculum today is supposed to be taught that way instead of chapter by chapter. But it hasn't really been adopted by teachers. Right? This was the curriculum changes a while back. This could be climate change, genetics, nanotechnology, non-renewable energies. It's about being cognizant of our personal and national decisions and how they affect other people. It's about considering other perspectives from around the world based on decisions you make here. My favorite thing, I think, of this paper was finding this little article here, Saunders and Rennie, and they developed a pedagogical model to help teachers effectively use socio-scientific issues as a means of promoting multiple perspectives. I should have shared the model of this with you guys. It was amazing. It's reflective of the features of the one we just looked at. So it had the critical reflection, had a rational discourse among the whole class. So issues cannot be addressed, this is just important to say, issues cannot be addressed effectively from a didactic, teacher-centered approach. The process of ethical reasoning is more about a respectful exploration of all viewpoints rather than about the final decision. Of course, the teacher themselves can't push the opinions on the students. The students have to really explore this on their own with the help, the support, and the scaffolding of the teacher. There's a few key questions that could be shared. Just as an example, you can't read this, so I apologize. But so here, the teacher's backgrounding the students where they're coming from, but there is that step of self-reflection, of critical reflection, and a few key questions. So these authors offer key questions that could be used, guiding questions for every single step, and classroom activities that could be used. So it's like, why is this issue important to me? Where do I stand on the issue? What do I think, and why do I think these things? For critical reflective questions. And then it goes on to group discussions. And then finding specific questions, like the whole class working together to figure out what needs to be addressed and how these issues can be changed. It could be about gender, it could be about sexuality, it could be about anything. I guess I have to accelerate. I wanted to revisit multicultural education. But over and over in my research, I saw Derek Hodson's work come up, so I thought, all right, I'll take some of it. But essentially, you can have really weak multicultural education, appreciating and identifying culturally situated scientific and technological innovations, all the way to actually doing something about it, coming up with your own thoughts, thinking about other people's thoughts, or ideas or points of view, and actually taking action. And then no longer being an observer, but actually within the classroom, going outside the classroom with your students, talking about this with the rest of the school, with the municipality that you're in, with the community. And just to wrap it up, I sort of at the end of my capstone created like a toolbox of things that can be used by the teacher. So I've gone over it already. Exploring the nature of knowledge and cognitive dissonance with your students. Introducing a disorienting dilemma, which you might have different ones for your students, considering they're all coming from different points of different backgrounds and environments. Asking questions like, why is that important to me? Why am I interested in this issue? Very much, this is part of the disorienting dilemma. And the self-reflection. And then there's the rational discourse, so the discussion amongst the whole class, to explore the various ways the class observes an issue. So it should highlight any incongruences, biases, or blind spots in those beliefs and assumptions. So students can start respectfully, you have to set that up yourself, to question each other and where they're coming from. You can't do this on your own. This is very much something that's done in a group. And then forming essential investigative questions, and actively considering all perspectives surrounding an issue as a class, and planning for the course of action, and then taking action. But what I appreciated the most was the ethical model that Saunders and Rennie developed. That was the closest thing to answering my question that's been developed so far. And then that's it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to, Mike, I want to accelerate a bit towards the end, but are there questions?
First question, the picture that you showed looks really interesting. It was a little bit blurry out there.
Yeah, it was super blurry.
Yeah, where would I be able to find like a more version of that?
I can send you one because I was gonna, if I was more prepared, I would have made copies of that specifically to share with everybody. Yeah, I'll send you a copy.
I really want
It's
this.
really interesting, especially with the a lot of research went into this in particular, and there was, this development of empathy that was observed in the students and considering different perspectives. It could have been, I don't know, deforestation investigations, and considering how, even here you have an impact on things happening on the other side of the world. There's all kinds of classroom activity suggestions.
So my question also has to do with models. I was just wondering, so you showed it in a science kind of like setting, but do you think it could apply to other subject areas as well?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's being a model. I'm sure it can be adapted. But what I noticed between that, a transformative model I saw by Jack Mesereau, there's even the socio-political one by Watson. They all had a few common things, whereas you're presenting an issue, you're using that as a context for learning. There's some point, there's critical reflection that has to happen with the student thinking on his own or her own. And then there's that discourse happening. You need to involve the entire classroom. The entire classroom is developing questions that don't necessarily have an answer right away, but I'm sure that can be applied in any classroom that you're in.
Mhm.
History, English, right? Languages. I think it's very flexible.
One thing I'm eternally curious about is science, at least in terms of knowledge construction in our Western societies, is almost inassailable. And when you're creating a context where you're deconstructing that to some extent, and Kuhn was probably the first thinker to really take a plunge there. And it's just like, I'm a historian by trade, and we spend a lot of time looking back at our work and just with our eyes wide open through historiography, etc. And science seems to get a pass, even though racism is a construct from science. Even though when you can look back at the little, what chemistry looked like 100 years ago, biology, etc. How come that's the case?
Science gets a pass.
Yeah, a pass in terms
That's
of,
the way it's taught. I'm wondering if it's the way all the facts are presented as absolutes, and maybe it removes wiggle room. I don't know. But I always thought it was a big part of that was simply the way it's taught. Everything is taught from one particular perspective. Many things are taught in a sort of a bubble. And so when that happens, you're sort of streamlined to think one way, I suppose, and you're not getting other perspectives. I don't know. And the sciences now, it's still, like many other things, everything that comes up is brand new. It's still developing.
no, I'm just curious, just throwing that out there because it's a
That's true.
subject. It's a subject that gets is a prestige subject in terms socioeconomically, parents, science, math, STEM, and yet it's a subject when it comes to self constructs. At least historically, people don't even consider it. What biology looked like in the 1920s and 30s. It's
a lot of it was silly.
phrenology, racial construct, like it was actually disturbing. But yet that never seems to see the light of day. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, well, I kind of want to build off of what you're saying. I have no idea why science, would get a pass. But it could also just be that a lot of our reality or a lot of the pillars of our ideology sort of rely on those absolute truths, right? Things that we don't want to put into question. And obviously there are people that get a type of, there's people that are advantaged by that. And so maybe that could be one of the reasons. I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there.
People make knowledge to benefit themselves. Right? Allison showed us this video. It's phrenology, but man, it's heavy stuff.
For sure.
100 years ago. What? Disgusting. I don't know why it's given so much weight, right? And
Prestige. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail us. It's Just always so fascinated.
Julian?
Just one thing. A lot of your examples, since my pastoral is also going to be a little bit about culture as well, you've answered some questions that I was thinking about a lot. When you look at a whole bunch of these false dichotomies that science teaches us, things like heterosexism and stuff like that, do you view the alternatives as being on a continuum between, two polar opposites, or are we talking about like we can't see everything else around us, like there's so many other possibilities that exist we're not aware of?
I suppose if you were to choose a continuum, you can accept that there are things that you still can't see in either. Well, there's a continuum, I guess, with two opposites,
Yeah.
and then a whole range between.
So gender as an example, we have, male, female. Will we be talking about the differences between them, or will we be talking about?
I think even in, it sounds silly, but even in choosing between the two, I think it's pointless. Again, that's trying to find a one-way, or it can only be a continuum with the two polar opposites, or no, it's absolutely a continuum. I can't really get that. I just always thought of it as a continuum and nothing else. Without thinking about what's on either end.
So just the idea that a dichotomy would be the false sort of thinking about it like that.
Being so rigid and sure in your thinking, I think that's a dangerous thing.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you. Very interesting. Thanks a lot. So the next person up is Julian, and that's at 1940. So this will provide you a bit of a break, folks. And is Cynthia Penetal here? Okay.
Julian,
If you want to lend it to me, otherwise I have one as well.
no.
It's already connected.
There we go. Maybe I'll send it now.
I'm very curious. Very interesting.
Yeah.